This is the 6th day of the August 86 retreat. We will begin by looking at a comment made by somebody. About this whole movement to meetings when a group is called up. This particular person mentioned how much there's being talked about moving quietly in this area. Balcony, solarium, dining room. And yet why, when a group is called up, is there this stomping rush to get to the balcony? It's the first time this has come up in years. I did mention to this person how it used to be. To fill in people who were not there then, it was a stampede in which sometimes people were actually knocked over. I don't know whether it ever happened. I don't think it ever happened here. May have happened in Camp Onanda. It took us a while to drop this cherished habit of running to meetings. All kind of explanations given for the reason for it. The build of energy, the joy of running. Not to be first, that wasn't the point. It was to give expression to this energy. But to this person who made this comment, it seemed as though there was very much the need to be the first in line. It may have been an interpretation on this person's part. So it is for us to look whether this is indeed there. Needing to get there first, regardless of the general atmosphere of this room, which is one of quiet and consideration and sensitivity to what is happening not just in oneself but all around. See, this goes on all the time. There are all kinds of things, personal things going on in oneself or in one's relationship to certain people. But we're also with each other, with other people. And can their feelings and state of mind be sensed? Not mind reading, we're not talking about reading other people's thoughts, but to be sensitive to the general state of mind, atmosphere, and to see whether one's own personal needs and doings do not conflict with that or intrude upon that. When we started this whole method of using groups, the reason for it was to assure each and every one that there was a place for each one in the balcony, in the what we will call then the waiting line. Not that one had to be there or else one had to go back and run again and have to be going back. That was dropped immediately from the beginning. Everyone knows there's a place. One may not get in this time, and maybe one needs to get in this time, and therefore the rush, is that it? That one just has to be there? Can one walk fast on tiptoes? Parents learn to tiptoe when they have sleeping babies, and when waking the baby up means to have to be with this baby again. For hours maybe. So all of a sudden, one learns to be very quiet and there's a real beauty of not just being in touch with what is happening within oneself, but also in touch with what is happening close to oneself, with the people near oneself, and what is happening with the grass and the clover and the trees and the stream. And this being in touch, this contact, happens when the mind is quiet and therefore receptive, open, not separate from all the movements within and outside. There being no differentiation between movement within and movement outside. It's one movement. One movement of, why do we have to give it a name? Maybe easier for some people to tiptoe than for others. Our bodies are built differently. Different coordinating abilities, different training. Some people have had gymnastics, dancing lessons for years, body awareness courses, training, and some people have not. Some people's bodies are heavy, others are very light. But can one begin to listen to the sounds that one produces? Not judgmentally, not trying to immediately impose a new training before what is happening has really been heard and understood, not just superficially, but deeply. One person once told me, I'm going to stomp through this room as long as people seem to be attached to this artificial silence. Is one trying to teach other people something? One can look at all of this. It's a whole textbook to be discovered in oneself. If one begins to question, if one just doesn't say, well, this is my way and the others better get used to it, or I have no way of changing it, or all these rationalizations we give for our habits, which means no looking, no questioning. Someone also mentioned, you talk with intensity and at great length about the conditioning going on and in other groups. The danger of identity with an ism. And here's an organization too. Are people identified with this organization? Isn't there attachment to what is going on here? And isn't there immediate separation too, if there is this identification going on? Thinking we've got the place of places, so much better than these other benighted people. who haven't seen the light yet. I'm just using words I've never heard anybody say. But when we think that way, be a little bit too modest to say it out loud, but feel that way. Yes, there is an organization here, unfortunately. We couldn't come up with anything but what we've come up with so far, even though we are open to changes. As there are endless hours being put into discussing what people say, what we feel about could be changed, and weighing it from many different sides. We may leave points of view out. And there is the possibility and maybe the actuality of attachment to this place, identity with it. This is for each one to look at, and we do talk about it. We do not sweep this kind of mind activity under the rug. On the contrary, this is what we're here for. To expose, question, look at identity, understand it in its depth, and maybe in this understanding drop it completely. The walking we have, which has been labeled by some people ritualistic, is not here to provide a ritual, but to provide some possibility of walking. If one is personally attached to it, has to be seen by oneself. Maybe we can briefly, we've done it before, but we can briefly go into what really is a ritual. I'm always using this example. It comes to mind of someone who once went to a sesshin, a retreat, a very rigorous, disciplined retreat. Lots of stick wielding, sitters being hit on the shoulders to encourage and to spur them on. And that person, as he reported to me, himself was consumed by fright, terror, and yet felt he had to stick it out. Other people hadn't. He was going to stick this thing out. And he noticed, not from the beginning, he said, but maybe on the second or third day that he was taking a bath or a shower, that he was doing exactly the same thing every day, the way he took the soap, the way he soaped the rag, what he soaped first on his body. And the whole thing, he said, before my own eyes, a ritual was developing, and I could not let go of it. And his feeling was that with this ritual, the fear was being held in check. This has long been discovered by psychoanalytical theory and practice, that out of fear, rituals are developed. We know it in little children. The blanket, the safety blanket, carried around, particularly when mother to whom one may be attached is not there, then the blanket. In case of upset, the blanket. It has been even observed in little chimps who have been given a blanket. Moment of fright, rushing to that terry cloth to feel its texture, a comfort coming from that. all religions, I don't think there is a religion that does not offer ritual and ceremony in which the mind can take refuge and comfort and maybe come to a state of ecstasy, elation, high energy, which feels good and which keeps fear, loneliness, sorrow in abeyance, deals with it, as we say, but not directly. Here in this place, even though we do walk around in a circle, sort of a strange circle, it's not a real circle. And we have neatly arranged mats which smack of compulsive obsessiveness. Or obsessive compulsiveness. Is one attached to the orderliness of the mats? Does it give one a feeling of comfort and security, seeing them all neatly lined up, none out of place? And if this is so, can one look at what's going on at that moment? That the comfort arises. All of this is open to inspection and to detection. It's the marvelous thing about this mind. It doesn't only attach to things, it can also detect attachment, see it, understand it, see it how it arises, what it does, at what time it arises. And maybe instead of going with the attachment, remain with the condition out of which this clinging arises, namely the fear, the loneliness, the pain, anxiety, terror, panic. Question that and not step into ritual or faith or belief or ceremony or vow for the sake of understanding the bare foundation of our living. Our living in conflict, alone with each other and with the whole world. Even war has ritualistic aspects. The drum corps, we don't have that anymore. Used to be the drum corps marching in front of the people with the rifles or bayonets or whatever weapons they were holding in their hands to instill what is called courage, adrenaline. To do what no human being in their right senses and natural setting would ever do. Throw themselves into a firing line and fire oneself onto one's fellow human beings. You may correct me on that. It does happen without drums. Happens when we're obsessed with ideas that we have to have what somebody else has, or we have to avenge something, or we have to protect, or loot, get someone else's property, or slaves or women. This is how it probably started in the very beginning. Coming back to attachment to this organization, if it's there, can it be exposed? questioned? And can one come here for retreat or for meeting without attachment? It's hard to tell as long as the place is there. May not know how attached one is to someone or something until one loses that someone or something. But that's only when one is not questioning it from the very beginning and looking what arises in the mind as image of the place, of the person who gives the meetings. Do these images arise at a moment of feeling desperate or depressed? And then does the mind go with the image of the place, of the person, or the people? Or does one remain with a depression? Remaining not meaning wallowing in it, but allowing it to show itself, to be felt. Living with it as it, how it acts, how it impacts, how new thoughts about it increase it, how one longs to be away from it, all the whole thing. We've talked a lot about it in talks and in meetings. And we will continue to talk about it as long as it's there. Always taking a fresh look. Wondering if one is really taking a fresh look or rather wants to go to some entertainment away from this fresh looking. Another cluster of questions is about how to be with children. One person once asked, how can I ever make up for the mistakes done to my children? For what I've done to my children? Another question, how can I bring my children up properly? What is the right education for my children? Now you may think, I have no children, this doesn't interest me, but it involves all of us. Because educating children, bringing up children is bringing up ourselves, educating ourselves. Even though we've grown in size and physical maturity, our patterns of thinking and behaving are very much, to an enormous degree, overwhelmingly dictated by the patterns that we learned as children. Against our will or willingly, whatever that means. Let's go into this very first question. How can I ever make up for what I have done wrong in the past with my children? I see it now. And I see the effects in my children. I can tell. It has to do with how I used to speak to them or treat them or whatever. And I think it's already clear this doesn't just refer to what one has done with children. What we've done to our best friends, our parents, our acquaintances. Seeing the consequences of it now, and also seeing how limited, how ignorant that was, how the action came out of ignorance of another person, another person's feelings and way of living, and stomping on that, unawares, insensitively, just following compulsively one's own patterns, really not knowing any better most of the time. Happens particularly when one has a child. Patterns that have been buried in one's mind, dating back to one's own childhood. What one was punished for, particularly what one was punished for, or what was frowned upon. Very often just a frown of a parent can be a severe punishment to a sensitive child. Sort of the evil eye looking at one. And that sort of having become covered over, one has forgotten about it. It's too painful. Comes a point where something is too painful for a child and it's just buried, unavailable to the conscious mind. And now one has one's own child, and the child does exactly the same thing that one was punished for. And an unfathomable, incredible rage or anger welling up in one at what this child is doing, which factually doesn't merit this kind of an outbreak of a response. And yet, we've done this too in our development as children. If we have needed to live with our parents on some kind of a peaceful footing at all, we have justified what they're doing as right. Else how could children live with their parents? I'm exaggerating, I'm aware of it. But these irrational outbreaks that we have as parents, because something has happened emotionally, and the dumping on the child, or the child having triggered something that was deeply repressed and depressed as evil, as bad, as not to be looked at, being triggered, and then the response. The amazing fact is that very often one feels one's parents were right in what they did, and therefore I'm right in what I'm doing. And this is how upbringing gets perpetuated. Sometimes parents saying, I wish my parents had treated me more strictly, so I would have behaved better. And now I'm going to take care that my child behaves better than I did when I was a child. The unquestioning introjection of the parental behavior. And then with doing this work, or it doesn't have to happen in retreat or while sitting, but all of a sudden it dawns on one, what am I doing? There's some freedom to look. And one reflects back, what have I been doing? And one shudders. And then comes this question which was asked, how can I make up for what I did to my children? How can I correct the mistakes? Can I? Can I undo hurts that I did to someone else years ago or yesterday? Do the regrets about it, the guilt over it, help to undo it? Of course not. Regrets and guilt don't undo what has been done. Nothing undoes what has been done. One can say, I'm sorry for what I did, but it still doesn't undo that hurt. Or does it? It depends on the person who has been hurt. Does an apology wipe away the incident, or is the scar there to be triggered time and time again when a new hurt happens, so that more and more hurts reverberate in this orchestra of hurts? But we were asking about regret and guilt. Thinking back of the time at which the hurt happened to the child, to the friend, to the parent. It happened because there was just the compulsion of the response. To hit, to yell, to grab the child or send him to his room or whatever one does in one's exasperation. It was just me and my problem. No sensitivity for the other person. No seeing that other person. Maybe he hadn't even done or meant what one took to be so. One doesn't know. In rage and anger, one can't see. The shutters are closed, almost closed, and what comes in is distorted. One is preoccupied with one's own hurt. And the tension of it and wanting release for that hurt. From that hurt. It's the narrowest of spaces. In regretting that, does one enter a new narrow space of guilt and regret? Again, occupied and preoccupied with how bad one was. Not liking the consequences very often. It is not only that one feels bad for the person who has been hurt, but one doesn't like the feeling of having hurt that person. It's, again, not wanting to feel the pain oneself. And in guilt, there's always an element of fear of being found out somehow or other. There's a very vague thing, which also very likely dates back to our childhood. Dad may find out, or mom may find out, Or mom may tell dad and he may come down with some kind of a punishment. Or then there is a lot of religious systems, the angry, avenging God who sees everything. No matter if you hide behind a tree or not, he sees it. In some religions it's karma, which is not seen and understood, but is so easily projected into some invisible force. That will mete out punishment or consequences, a painful next life. So guilt has this ingredient of fear of being found out, doesn't it? You don't have to agree. All of this is not said to indoctrinate in any theories. We're looking at this, and if you're into it, we're looking at it together. Examine it for yourself during daily life. Sometimes people say, what's the relationship between mat work and daily life? This is the relationship. To take guilt and regrets under the magnifying glass, look what's all in there, and look what happens to the mind that is consumed with guilt and regrets. It is again in a narrow chamber in which there is no sensitivity for the people near us, nearest, near, and farther away. And it is out of this narrowness of living, enclosed in one's own hurts and guilts and regrets, that we do hurtful things to others because we don't see them. We don't have the feel for them, which happens when this narrow chamber opens up. So, becoming aware of this preoccupation with guilt and regret over what one did yesterday or 10 years ago. Can one see not just the content of this preoccupation, the thoughts and feelings, but the enclosedness of it, the narrowness of it, the absence of space in it, the impossibility to see and feel and touch and hear what's happening right next to us. It's only when there is this openness and space and sensitivity to what happens right next to us that we won't continue hurting, for which we have to be regretful again the moment we become aware of it. It is all a matter of awareness, isn't it? Not, I must be aware so I don't hurt people, but awareness of where we are, this moment. fretting over having hurt, and therefore hurting through one's isolation. Not condemning it. There's no room for that in awareness. Condemnation is again, the shutter's closed. One has to look at what one is doing, reflect on what one has been doing without condemnation, without regret. Is that possible? Or not allow the regret to be consuming, to see it and to be done with it. I want to go to the second part too, which was the question, how do I bring my children up properly? I really want to bring my children up right. Because one doesn't bring one's children up in one's home alone. Children are required to go to school at a certain age. And there's Sunday school, church school. Junior high, high school, university. How am I going to bring my children up right with all these influences which are so utterly beyond one's control? Is one even questioning these influences? Or does one say, well, we are part of society, so we have to get with it. Be one with it, because it's there. Is one questioning that if there is this attitude there, if there is this thought pattern, which is the easiest way out? I was talking with someone about sending children to a parochial school. This person said, the one who told me that her children may have to go to parochial school, it's in a different country, because the public schools are so incredibly poor where they live. And having talked to the sisters, they seem so nice. Is one thinking about this whole thing of what will happen to the children as they grow up? How they will inevitably, unless something radical happens, become identified, become members of churches, countries, nationalities, political movements. If there is no understanding on the part of the parent. If you say this is inevitable, this is natural, we live this way, then we can't even discuss it. But if we're wondering about it, then we can question together. whether a child can be an integrated whole human being as long as he is taught to be a this or that, religiously, nationally, politically. There's immediately a bias, immediately a limitation, immediately a separation from all the other possible identities. And with the identity goes pride. It is instilled by the ones who teach the religion, the politics, the nationalism, the patriotism. It is instilled. Pride is instilled. Pride and security, belongingness. And is one even interested that one child be a whole human being? Or does one say, this is beyond me, this is for him to take care of when he grows up? Or will one face this problem in oneself too? Because it will reveal all one's own attachment. Will it be too unsettling, too unnerving in discussing this once with a person? She's completely new at this. She had never thought and discussed in these ways before, questioned. She said, there's a terrific scaredness coming up in me, and asking, well, what is it? What is the scaredness about? She said, I feel creeping up a total lack of definition. That's a good description. Something was observed. The losing of boundaries of who I am. And of course, the idea I'm losing my boundaries is a scary idea. Actually, having no boundaries, there's nothing scary about it. It's the end of fear. So is one really interested that one's child be a whole human being? Which means, is oneself a whole human being? One cannot do this for someone else if there is division in oneself. One may not be able to do it for anyone anyways, but parents do have power over where they send their children and how they discuss with their children questions that come up, or even if a question does not come up. Children love to discuss with adults. Maybe just because at that moment there is a togetherness. They're not just being left to themselves, happy that they're playing with something and not imposing upon the adult who needs to do so many other things. In addition to the different, this is one thing a person said when I mentioned the conversation about sending a child to parochial school. This person said, well, what about sending the child to public school? Isn't it a very similar indoctrination, very similar identification? It is. Couldn't believe it, coming from Germany to this country, to see that every day in school, hand on heart, there's a pledge of allegiance to the flag. I thought Germany had the monopoly on that. I was very naive at the time. And we didn't even, yes, we did that. does a flag become to a child? Maybe you say, well, to me, I just never paid any much attention to it. I did it too, but it never took hold. But right now, if your country was invaded, and there was a call for arms with a lot of drums, what would the feelings be? Just like the feelings of the English at the time that a speck of an island was invaded. And flag waving as our boys left for the war down to this island there. And some people had just a few weeks before then in a discussion said nationalism is dead in England. It's not an issue anymore. It's dead when things are going all right. Will one talk with one's children about this? Or will one feel there is a righteous pride in being an American or German or whatever? Honest pride is the word that's used. By which I don't mean to go to the opposite in debunking. Clearly, seeing has no opposite. It's just seeing what isms do to the mind and to the people who are caught in it. To this incredibly beautiful earth that we all live on. Other things that await children in school, not just in school, it starts so early, is a sanctioned competition. Competition is a sanctioned mode of living in many countries, particularly in this one. Can one question competition, or will one say that it adds zest to life? Which it does, it gives energy. Children competing for grades can be sort of held in line, they can be held under control. But what does it do? Both to the one who's on the top, to the one who's in the middle, and the one who hasn't made the grade. Competition in sports, competition in everything. Everything that's being invented almost immediately becomes a competitive thing. Who's the best at it? Who can excel in it? And one of the reasons given is that this is how the joy of life is increased. Not for all, for the winners, yes. But what is that joy? It's this greed for more victories, more medals, or the blahs after the medals have been won, and returning to the shallowness of life, living without this additional adrenaline. And the competition in sports is linked with patriotism. We've talked about it often. You do it for your country. A little 14-year-old gymnast putting her country on the map. The pressure on a little child to uphold her country's honor in world competition. The grimness on the face. Never saw that little girl smile. You could say, well, how could I enjoy a sport if I wasn't competing? How could I enjoy ping pong if we didn't count? I think it's much more fun if you don't count. Then you can be friendly with each other, forgiving, appreciating. No pressure, and therefore really being with the whole thing. There are some schools where no grades are given. Some schools which are not graded into grades, but children of different ages work together. But unless the teachers themselves have shed the competitive spirit, really are free of it, it comes sort of in through the back door, obliquely. But as parent, has one shed it? Or is one waiting for these A's to appear on the grade card? Or at least a B, but not an F? So many of us parents say we don't push our children, he's free to do. But one is deceiving oneself. Unless one is really done with it and sees the damage of it, one is pushing in insidious ways. Claiming not to be interested in grades and still waiting for them and worrying when they don't come, the good grades. And to get the grade, the child has to be coerced into homework, coerced in the classroom. Can one look at all of this? Coercion, competition, these are the 3 C's. Conformity. Having to conform or else you're out. See the guidance counselor. By which I don't mean let's have schools, we've had those too, where laissez-faire, everything goes. I think it's, in the very beginning, it's a matter of just thinking about all of this, looking at it, and looking at it with one's wife or husband, and including the children too. So that there's a free flow of feelings and experiences. That the child can talk about things that happen. And the parent can point things out that are separating, dangerous. So the important thing is that freedom to look. Not hoping that at the end of a very coercive and conforming education or training, be it academic or spiritual, at the end of it, freedom will come. People say to me all the time, don't we need the training first before we can be free? We wouldn't know how to use the freedom if we weren't trained. See how distorted our thinking is? A coerced, conditioned, conforming mind, how can it be free? So can one look at the beginning with some measure of freedom, granted that all of our conditioning limits the freedom with which we can look, but we can wonder about this conditioning. Observe it in action, as people are doing, saying, my God, how could I have said this? I never realized what I'm doing, how I'm acting, how I'm responding. And then not to say, I don't want to look any further, this is too horrible. But to realize that one is observing the conditioned human mind, not my mind. One is observing something that is so general, so universal, so all-pervading. And not to withdraw with judgment or condemnation from this most essential work, but to keep going at it. Do I sound like a propagandist? I hope not. If one feels shaken in one's foundations, can one remain with what seeps up through the cracks? Remain with meaning, allow it to show itself and look at it. Or will one immediately get the cement out and patch it all up? We will end here for today.